Chapter 1. The moon hid behind a quilt of low clouds as the writer's car crept along the rutted forest road. Headlights sliced through dense sheets of drifting mist, revealing broken branches, skewed road signs, and moss-slick boulders that jutted from the soil like ancient vertebrae. The farther he drove, the more the night seemed to absorb sound. The engine's growl dulled, and even the tires' crunch over gravel felt muffled, as though the surrounding pines drank every vibration. Wind harassed the treetops, bending their black silhouettes into hunched figures that swayed and straightened in a slow, silent procession. Near midnight, he reached a small clearing, where the ground leveled into a pocket of hard earth. In its center rose the ranger's tower, a gaunt structure of weather-beaten boards and rusted hardware, 4 stories tall, its observation deck crowned by a skeletal railing. Decades of storms had stripped the paint, leaving the wooden planks gray and splintered, and the metal braces streaked with brittle oxidation. A single lantern hook dangled loose, tapping the siding with an intermittent metallic tick that echoed like a failing heartbeat. The car's headlights swept across the entrance. The door, warped by years of moisture, stood ajar by a hand's breadth, rocking on tired hinges whenever a gust cut through the clearing. No footprints marred the thin crust of snow on the steps, yet the irregular sway of the door suggested recent disturbance, as if someone unseen had slipped inside moments before the car arrived. The writer's pulse throbbed in his temples, both from exhaustion and from a rising prickle of caution he struggled to dismiss as irrational. He killed the engine, and its last rumble faded into a profound hush. In that stillness he became aware of distant resonances, low groans from trees rubbing together, the faint sigh of wind threading through hollows. They were ordinary sounds, yet tonight they seemed choreographed, fragments of a secret language spoken by the forest itself. With a steadying breath he stepped out, cold air knifing through his coat, and retrieved a small duffel and a battered typewriter case from the back seat. Frost nipped his skin, and each exhale emerged as a milky cloud that dissolved almost instantly in the restless breeze. Inside, the tower revealed a cramped room paneled with darkened pine boards. Dust motes swirled in the beam of his flashlight, settling over a clutter of forgotten tools, bent nails, rodent-chewed manuals, and a toppled stool. At the center stood an ancient desk whose surface bore concentric stains from long evaporated coffee cups. An overturned tin cup lay beneath it, its rim corroded, as if someone had grasped it with wet fingers and never set it upright again. Against the far wall, an iron stove yawned open, its ash pan brimming with gray flakes untouched for years. A broken clock hung above the desk, its glass cracked, the hour hand stalled between 10 and 11. The stillness of that hand disturbed the writer more than if it had been spinning wildly. Frozen time implied abandonment so absolute that even mechanisms had surrendered. He set his typewriter on the desk, the carriage bell jangling too loudly in the hush, and felt the walls press closer in the weak cone of light. Outside, wind howled through a gap in the roofing, funneling a faint wavering moan down the stairwell that coiled through the empty floors like a breath drawn from the depths of the tower itself. Rain began as a soft patter, then rose to a hard drumming against planks and tin. The writer unrolled his sleeping bag beside the stove, convinced that exhaustion would soon overpower unease, yet the tower refused to release its tension. The ajar door below creaked at irregular intervals, and every time it moved, the low lantern hook tapped the siding, slow, deliberate, patient. He lay awake long after the fireless stove cooled to the temperature of stone, listening to those 2 unsteady beats echo through the clearing, until night became an immovable weight, and the forest outside whispered things he could not translate. Chapter 2. Gray daylight seeped through the tower's warped shutters and revealed a landscape steeped in cold, colorless mist. The forest below lay motionless, its frost-silvered needles forming a silent sea that stretched toward unseen valleys. The writer woke with the unnerving certainty that someone had been watching him while he slept. The embers in the stove remained untouched, yet a sharp scent of char lingered in the room, as though smoke had drifted briefly and vanished before dawn. Every surface wore a thin film of moisture, making the wood grain glisten like sweat on clenched skin. He climbed the narrow stairwell to the observation deck. The railing was slick with ice, and across its rusted bars perched a single black feather, razor-edged and wet, pointing toward the line of trees where the clearing ended. Behind the treetops, a pale sun hovered, unable to break the cloud cover. The hiss of wind seemed woven with faint, almost electronic feedback, a distant crackle that rose and fell at irregular intervals. When he stepped back inside, the tower groaned as if recalibrating its weight. Among the morning's tasks, he decided to inventory the ranger's papers, hoping to distract himself. Most pages were melted together by dampness, but inside one warped drawer, he found a leather-bound logbook still mostly intact. The top sheet bore some ranger's neat handwriting that ended abruptly, mid-sentence decades earlier. Between brittle pages, he discovered a fresh slip of legal paper, unstained, uncreased, impossibly white against the yellowed journal. On the slip, in heavy ink, was his full name, followed by a pair of coordinates that matched the tower's latitude, yet listed an impossible longitude far out in the Pacific. There was no dust on the slip, no telltale curl of humidity. It felt placed. A chill pushed beneath his ribs while he searched for rational explanations. He recalled locking the door after midnight, yet muddy droplets peppered the floor near the threshold. He looked closer. Not mud, but a constellation of dark reddish beads that had dried as thin crusts, leading from the entrance toward the desk and ending beneath the chair where he now stood. Outside the door, fresh prints marred the snowless soil, skeletal impressions, elongated, neither boot nor bare foot, aligned in a deliberate path circling the tower 3 times before vanishing into undergrowth. The air thickened, charged with the metallic tang of ozone. The lantern hook on the siding began its slow tapping again, though wind had momentarily died. From below came a hollow thud that traveled upward through the joists, followed by the unmistakable scrape of something dragged across planks. Instinct urged him to flee, yet curiosity anchored his feet, terror and fascination interlaced like roots. He descended one flight and froze. The cellar hatch, previously jammed by rust, stood wide open, revealing a stairwell swallowed by pitch. Warm breath touched the back of his neck, though he stood alone. He turned in time to see the tower door swing shut without a sound, restoring the dim half-light and leaving him between the malignant dark below and the sealed world outside. An hour passed in suspended dread before the hush broke with an unexpected clamor from the rooftop. A cascade of pebbles or nails rattled across the tin, rolling to the edges, then falling through the slats onto the loft below. Evidence of unseen industry continued for several minutes, then ceased as abruptly as it had begun. When he later climbed to inspect, the roof bore no debris, yet a ring of soot-dark handprints covered the hatch frame. Each print was elongated, with a 6th finger curving inward. He retreated to the main level and shoved the white slip inside a pocket, unable to bring himself to destroy it. Afternoon sunk toward dusk. Shadows bled along floorboards, merging into opaque pools. The coordinates haunted him, an impossible location that implied either a cruel joke or a message. As twilight claimed the clearing, an orange spark ignited deep in the tree line. The phantom campfire once more. This time, a second spark flared beside it, then a third, forming a triangle that pulsated like a slow heartbeat. The rider felt the tower exhale a stale breath through unseen vents, and the feather on the railing spun end over end, drifting down toward the forest lights as though drawn by gravity deeper than the Earth's. Chapter 3. Night dropped like a shroud, sealing the tower in a void where even the wind lost its voice. An hour after sunset, the rider noticed the first disturbance, a delicate tremor that rippled through the floorboards, as if unseen fingers strummed the joists beneath his feet. He paused, heartbeat hammering, and felt the vibration cease. The silence afterward grew viscous, stretching long enough to suggest imagination, until a second tremor arrived, stronger, unmistakably rhythmic, traveling from one corner of the room to the other in languid, predatory steps. He crouched, ear inches from the warped planks. From below emerged a layered murmur, too faint to form words, yet arranged in cadences that mimicked speech. Multiple tones overlapped, some high and brittle, others guttural, weaving a broken choir that drifted back and forth like water sloshing in hidden chambers. When he pressed his palm against the floor, coldness radiated upward, numbing his skin. The whispers sharpened, converging beneath that point, as though they sensed contact and crowded closer to be heard. A sudden clack echoed through the tower. Upstairs, the frozen clock resumed ticking, each tick slower than the last but thunderous in the hush. The minute hand crawled forward, fighting some unseen resistance, then halted at midnight precisely. At that instant, every board in the room flexed inward, dropping a fraction of an inch, and the whispered chorus surged, filling the gaps with sibilant urgency. A draft spiraled up from between the planks, carrying a sweet rot odor like flowers left to decay in stagnant water. He snatched the flashlight, but its beam fractured, flickering as if the batteries drained in seconds. The walls pressed nearer in stuttering shadows. Beneath the floor a new sound emerged. Metal dragged across wood, scratching arcs that overlapped until they formed a crude, repetitive symbol. Dust sifted through seams and drifted in the failing light, sketching vague silhouettes that dissolved when he blinked. Driven by dread and grim curiosity, he pried loose a loosened board with a rusted chisel. Beneath lay a hollow cavity no taller than a crawlspace. The beam exposed a scatter of relics, a child's marbled shooter, a tarnished spoon, a strip of film negatives coiled like a sleeping snake. At the far end of the cavity rested a narrow opening, rough hewn into bedrock, descending into darker unknowns. From that cleft the whispers streamed, now distinct. His name uttered in a staggered rhythm, syllables overlapping like voices caught in static. He replaced the board, hands trembling so hard the nails rattled. The tower responded with a deep groan that seemed to originate from the trees outside, as if the forest acknowledged the breach. Window panes fogged instantly, each pane revealing streaks that resembled handprints dragged downward from the top frame. One pane cracked, spiderwebbing across its center. Through the fracture, he glimpsed a pale glow shifting between trunks, too low and sinuous to be flashlight or lantern. The lantern hook outside resumed its pendulum tap, but the beat aligned with the whispered syllables below, creating a slow, deliberate duet. Overhead, the roof began to creak under a new weight, boards warping in shallow breaths. Something paced directly above, matching the unseen steps beneath, penning him between two advancing fronts. Panic tightened his chest. Adrenaline surged, yet his legs refused command, anchored by primordial fear. A violent jolt rocked the tower, snuffing the flashlight entirely. Total darkness swallowed him, broken only when the cracks between floorboards emitted a dull red glow, pulsing like embers fanned by unseen lungs. In that hellish underlight, the walls revealed stains that had not been there before, patterns resembling elongated fingerprints converging toward the open cavity. The whispers crescendoed, a desperate, jubilant chant that rolled through his skull in waves of icy pressure. Then, without transition, silence reclaimed the structure. The red glow extinguished, the roof settled, the hook hung still. Yet, in that dead calm, he heard one final sound. A liquid drip directly beneath where he stood, falling at steady intervals onto something soft. The tower exuded a satisfied hush, as though the night's labor had concluded. He stood paralyzed, sensing that whatever lurked below now possessed something it had lacked only moments earlier, and that it waited, patient, just inches beneath his feet, for night to deepen and courage to fail. Chapter 4. Moonlight never fully returned. Instead, a colorless sheen settled over the clearing like the reflection of distant sheet lightning. The writer's nerves twitched with every minor creak as he paced the cramped upper room, unable to decide whether to flee or barricade anew. Midnight crept past with glacial reluctance, and the tower's dry timbers amplified each second into a hollow echo. His limbs ached from tension held too long, but he feared that even the smallest concession to fatigue would invite the unseen voices to resume their work beneath the floor. An hour later, a faint rasp clawed at the edge of hearing, a sound distinct from wind or shifting lumber. He edged toward the balcony door, unlatched it, and felt a blast of frozen air sweep inside. The forest below stood rigid in unnatural stillness, branches frozen mid-sway, needles glittering with rime as though time itself had paused. Near the tree line, a lone shape materialized, carved from shadow but darker than any surrounding darkness. It wore a hooded cloak that swallowed all light, leaving only an oblong void where a face should have been. The figure's posture suggested patient observation rather than threat, yet terror flooded him, instinct recognizing a predator's focus. The tower's exterior lantern hook began to swing of its own accord, clanging against the siding with deliberate cadence, and the hooded watcher tilted its invisible gaze upward. His pulse slammed so violently that spots danced across his vision. He stepped back, intending to retreat, when two more cloaked forms coalesced beside the first, then a fourth behind them, each joining the silent vigil with choreographed precision. Their arrangement formed a loose spiral centered on the tower, as if obeying some ancient sigil etched into the clearing soil. He scrambled for his phone. The screen refused to awaken. The backup radio hissed open channels filled only with reverse pulses resembling slowed heartbeats. A thunderless vibration rolled through the ground, and dust sifted from ceiling boards. The hooded quartet advanced, not by walking but by abrupt increments, present, gone, nearer, like frames missing between film reels. Panic propelled him to slam the balcony door, but the latch failed. The door drifted inward again, governed by no breath of air. Downstairs, the entry door swung wide, then stopped halfway, fingernails of light stripping across floorboards. A heavy footfall ascended the first step of the spiral staircase. Another followed, spacing deliberate, metal fasteners groaning beneath unfamiliar weight. The writer seized a chair, forced it under the knob, and backed toward the shattered window from the night before, gauging the drop into darkness. The stairwell settled into silence, yet his gut insisted the climber had merely paused. From the corner of his eye, he noticed movement outside. The cloaked forms multiplied, spilling from between trees in twos and threes. Soon a broad ring of black silhouettes encircled the tower, each figure anthropomorphic, yet subtly distorted. Shoulders too narrow, torsos elongating beyond human proportion. Their hoods absorbed the weak lunar glow, rendering them as voids cut from reality. Where faces should have been, a faint inner shimmer pulsed, red and distant, like coals glimpsed through deep caverns. The tower lights failed in a single blink. Thick darkness swallowed the room, and with it came a pressure change so abrupt his ears popped. In the pitch, he heard the chair scrape aside, though nothing touched it. A rush of footfalls blasted up the stairwell. Too many limbs, too swift, a living avalanche. He smashed the window with the flashlight's butt, shards spraying into the night. The forest smoldered in pale luminescence, and beneath the tower a dozen scarlet embers lifted as the hoods angled upward in unison. As he climbed onto the sill, icy fingers of wind clawed his face. Yet behind him the air burned with carrion heat. The climb down the jagged support beams tore fabric and skin. He landed in crusted snow that stung like needles. Immediately the whispering chorus erupted from all sides, an exultant surge oscillating between frequencies, rewriting ordinary perception. He staggered forward, boots cracking thin ice layers, while silhouettes drifted at the clearing's edge, maintaining perfect distance as though shepherding prey. Mid-clearance, a wall of scent arrested him, overripe lilacs mixed with coppery blood, and the ground beneath sagged subtly, as if an enormous hollow yawned below the crust. The nearest figure took one step forward, robe brushing the snow yet leaving no imprint, and lifted its hooded head. The shimmer inside flared, revealing for a heartbeat an impossible visage. 6 narrow eyes stacked vertically, all frozen glass, reflecting his own terrified outline. Adrenaline overrode paralysis. He bolted for the tree line opposite the ring, lungs blazing, heart clubbing ribs so hard it threatened to splinter them. In his back he felt not pursuit but surveillance, relentless and clinical, as if the watchers recorded every ragged breath. The tower receded, its windows now radiant with pulsing red light, each flash synchronized with the thud of his heartbeat. Just before the forest swallowed him, he glanced back once more. The cloaked congregation had vanished, leaving the clearing undisturbed, save for a single black feather spinning lazily where his footprints began, settling atop unmarred snow like the period at the end of an unfinished sentence. Chapter 5. Branches flailed like skeletal arms as the writer plunged into the woodland maze, snow crust shattering beneath every frantic step. The forest had lost all familiar geometry. Trees bowed inward, forming warped corridors that funneled him deeper instead of outward. Breath steamed in jagged bursts, each exhale sounding unnaturally loud against the hush that followed his passage. Behind him, whispers stitched his name into the wind, a needling persistence that never rose above murmur, yet carried the weight of pursuit. Moonlight filtered through rifts in the canopy, carving harsh lattices that flicked across his path. Each time he crossed a beam, his shadow elongated far beyond natural proportion, racing ahead like a guide before snapping back when darkness reclaimed the ground. The 4th time it happened, the shadow failed to retract. It continued forward, independent of his movements, then paused and turned, its head shape tilting with predatory curiosity. Terror surged so violently that he tripped, sprawled, and clawed at earth slick with frost and decomposed needles. When he regained his feet, the rogue silhouette vanished, but the cold imprint of its attention lingered, pressing between his shoulder blades like a knife tip. He broke into a clearing he did not remember, though moss-draped stone suggested ancient human presence. In the center stood a rusted playground carousel, absurdly out of place this deep in wilderness. It revolved slowly without impetus, metal screeching in a childlike rhythm. As it turned, he saw slender handprints smeared in every panel of paint, each print elongated, 6-fingered, identical to the marks found beneath the floorboards. The carousel completed one rotation and stopped facing him, issuing a soft click as if locking onto target. At that moment, the forest chorus fell silent. Even his heartbeat seemed to hush, awaiting something inevitable. Snow erupted behind him in a spray of white as an unseen weight crashed to the ground. He sprinted, driven by primal certainty that whatever landed would match his speed, yet no footfalls followed. Instead, a second impact occurred ahead, then to the left, then to the right, as though invisible predators leapfrogged through the canopy, herding him towards some unseen destination. Every landing sent tremors through the soil, shaking icicles from branches in shimmering curtains. One shard sliced his cheek. Warm blood steamed in the frigid air. Through the trees he glimpsed the dull reflection of metal, his car, standing where he had abandoned it near the road. Relief flared, eclipsed instantly by dread when he noticed the driver's side door hanging open, interior dome light blinking as if someone repeatedly depressed the switch. No footprints led to the vehicle, yet the seatbelt dangled outside, buckled, as though an occupant had vanished mid-motion. The engine compartment smoked faintly, oil rich and bitter, though the key remained in his pocket. He lunged inside, slammed the door, and twisted the key. The starter clicked without turning. Dashboard needles convulsed, all gauges pinning to maximum, emitting a shrill electronic whine. In the windshield reflection, he saw a movement behind the rear seats, a ripple in fabric, a depression forming as if weight settled gradually. Cold breath purled on the glass, though every vent blew only frigid air. He averted his eyes, fearing confirmation, and pounded the steering wheel. The interior light died, leaving him encased in a black capsule that stank of iron and pine tar. Outside, the hooded figures emerged one by one from the tree line, forming a semicircle just beyond the headlight's dormant reach. Their robes now glimmered as if woven from wet ash, absorbing stray photons and exhaling dim vermilion pulses in sync with the erratic whine of the dashboard. Each pulse revealed minute changes. Hoods stretched higher, limbs lengthened, feet failed to dent the snow. They stood motionless, yet shifted closer between blinks, obeying a logic of omission that allowed no intermediate movement. A low hum flowered beneath the car, starting as vibration in the floor pan and blooming into a resonant chord that rattled window glass. The gauges abruptly died, and the engine roared to life with explosive violence, headlights flaring so bright that the nearest figures dissolved into afterimages on his retinas. He slammed the transmission into drive. The tires spun, spraying slush and gravel. At the margins of vision, he registered shapes pacing the vehicle, perfectly parallel, never overtaken despite his frantic acceleration. The speedometer climbed, but the same gnarled oak repeated outside the window again and again, as if the road coiled in a loop, imprisoning him within an elastic boundary. Just as panic tipped into hopelessness, a break in the forest appeared, revealing the county highway like a river of cracked asphalt. The car broke free of the loop with a jolt that nearly snapped the steering column. G-force pinned him to the seat while the odometer screamed. In the rearview mirror, the tree line receded, then the figures, then all light. Only darkness remained, pierced by two crimson points that lingered far longer than physics allowed, bobbing like lanterns held by unseen hands until the curvature of the road erased them, and the whispers finally fell silent. Chapter 6. Rain glazed the city in a spectral sheen when the writer finally crossed its boundary, dawn steel gray and reluctant above empty avenues. His apartment stood on the top floor of a converted warehouse, once spacious and comforting, now cavernous and unfamiliar. He locked every bolt, drew every blind, and convinced himself that civilization's density would smother the nightmare of Black Hollow. Yet silence here felt thinner, as though urban noise peeled away from him, leaving a pocket of untouched quiet. The radiators ticked weakly. Their heat never reached full strength, and a faint pine odor clung to his clothes no matter how many times he showered. The first night passed in fitful half-sleep. At exactly midnight, a soft tread crossed the roof overhead. One step, a pause, another, each placement measured, deliberate. Pigeons often nested there, but these footfalls carried the weight of something bipedal and patient. When he rose to investigate, the building's staircase stretched longer than memory, landings duplicating until he returned to his door without reaching the roof hatch. He chalked it to exhaustion, yet unease anchored deep. By the third night, a new pattern emerged. The steps began in the ceiling, descended internal walls, and settled into the hallway outside his bedroom. They never hurried, never faltered, and always halted when his pulse spiked loud enough to drown them. Lights flickered synchronously, bulbs buzzing with faint red afterglow whenever the sound withdrew. In those interludes, he heard his clock resume ticking, though its battery lay removed on the nightstand. Morning offered no respite. A white envelope rested atop his desk, pristine as the slip he had found in the ranger's logbook. Inside lay a single Polaroid showing the tower ablaze with crimson lanterns, cloaked figures arrayed around its base, their hoods lifted toward the camera. The timestamp displayed midnight of the coming night. Beneath the photo, an indentation in the paper suggested invisible ink. When steam from his coffee drifted across the surface, the letters of his name slowly emerged, then dissolved before he could read more. Paranoia bled into waking hours. Streets seemed emptier, faces too pale, traffic lights lingering on yellow as if uncertain. Every reflective surface offered brief, distorted glimpses of a hooded silhouette standing just outside his peripheral vision. He smashed a bathroom mirror after the figure's six-eyed visage replaced his own, but the fragments on the floor retained the reflection. Each shard a tiny portal leaking faint vermilion light until he swept them away. Night 6 arrived with barometric pressure that felt like a hand on his skull. The steps began before sunset, pacing the length of the roof, then the attic, then the corridor. This time they continued, crossing his threshold without protest from the locked door. Boards creaked across the living room, the pattern circling clockwise as if tracing a sigil. The apartment lights died, replaced by the pulsing glow he remembered from beneath the tower floorboards, seeping through walls in branching capillaries of crimson. The air thickened with floral rot. From the kitchen closet came the metallic tap of a lantern hook against wood, though no such object existed there. He stood immobilized, every muscle threaded with static, while the steps approached across the hardwood, slow and inevitable. They stopped behind him. Breath, cold and damp, grazed his nape. In the dark glass of the microwave door, he watched a hood rise over fragmented reflections, the 6 vertical eyes igniting one by one like funeral candles. He lunged for the front door, hand colliding with an unseen surface. The hallway beyond had disappeared. Instead, the familiar spiral stair of the ranger's tower stretched downward, its planks slick with melting frost. From the gloom below, dissonant whispers surged upward, repeating the intervallic chant that once poured through the floor. The apartment ceiling above him now showed starless sky, while icy wind funneled through invisible gaps. The Polaroid slipped from his pocket, landed image side up, and began to smoke. Faces within the photograph turned toward him in unison, mouths opening in silent invitation. Behind him, the cloaked presence extended a hand of impossible length, fingers tipping into claws of shadow. The wooden steps underfoot vibrated as though eager to uncoil. In that moment, the city, the apartment, and the forest fused into a single impossible architecture of night, all exits folding inward. The writer felt the structure breathe, a vast, sentient exhalation, and heard the eternal steps resume, now descending toward him from every direction at once, relentless, reclamatory, and without end.